The voicemail came in while I was standing in line at the pharmacy, holding a paper bag with my mother's handwriting still faintly visible on it. I almost didn't listen to it. I usually don't play voicemails in public. But something about the timing felt off, like a wrong note in a song I'd heard too many times. Lena, my brother's voice, said clipped and careful the way he sounds when he's already decided something and just needs to inform me. We need to talk. It's about the house. Call me back today. That was it. No hello, no checking in, no mention of the fact that our mother had been gone for less than 6 months. I stood there longer than I should have, the line inching forward, the pharmacist clearing her throat, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The word house echoed in my head, heavy and out of place. Not home, not Mom's place, the house, as if it had already stopped belonging to memory and started belonging to paperwork. My name is Lena Caldwell. I was 32 years old that spring, living alone in a small rented duplex outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I worked as an operations analyst for a regional logistics firm, the kind of job where you're invisible when everything runs smoothly and blamed the moment something doesn't. I liked it that way. I'd spent most of my adult life learning how to exist without drawing too much attention, especially inside my own family. The house my brother was talking about sat 3 hours west, tucked into a quiet mountain town where our parents had retired. A modest place, nothing grand. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a wraparound porch. My father built himself after he quit drinking. My mother loved that porch. She used to say it made her feel like the world would always come back around if you waited long enough. I stepped outside the pharmacy before calling him back. The air smelled like asphalt and early pollen. My phone felt warm in my hand. "What's going on?" I asked when he picked up. There was a pause, not a confused one, a deliberate one. "Emily and I are thinking of listing the house," he said. "The market's good right now." I closed my eyes. Emily was his wife, my sister-in-law. The woman who had hugged me at the funeral and whispered, "We'll take care of everything," like it was a kindness. "You're thinking of selling it?" I asked. "Well," he said, exhaling, "we've already talked to a realtor. It just makes sense. It just makes sense." That phrase would come back later, dressed in different clothes, but always meaning the same thing. This is happening whether you agree or not. "What about Mom's will?" I asked. Another pause, shorter this time. "We'll go over all of that," he said. "That's why we need to talk." I knew then that something had already shifted. The conversation wasn't about whether the house would be sold. It was about how I would be informed. My brother Mark is 5 years older than me. Growing up, he was the loud one, the one teachers liked, the one who learned early that confidence could cover a lot of things. I was the quiet one, the organizer, the one who remembered appointments and made sure bills got paid when our parents started slipping into their own separate griefs. After Dad died, Mom relied on me more than she admitted out loud. I drove her to doctor appointments. I handled her insurance paperwork. I sat with her in the evenings when the house got too quiet and she didn't want to turn on the television. Mark lived 2 states away by then. He called on Sundays, sent flowers on holidays. He did not sit with her when she cried. None of that was written into the will. Care never is. We met a week later at the house. I arrived early like I always do. The porch creaked the same way it always had. The smell of lemon cleaners still lingered in the kitchen. I ran my fingers along the edge of the dining table, remembering how Mom used to tap there when she was thinking. Mark and Emily pulled in together, new SUV, clean tires, confident smiles. They didn't ask me how I was holding up. Emily went straight to the kitchen and started talking about paint colors. Mark pulled out a folder. "Let's just go through this," he said, spreading papers across the table. The will was straightforward on the surface. The house was left to both of us. 50-50. But there was a clause I hadn't noticed before buried in legal language. Management authority defaulted to the eldest child unless otherwise specified. "That's standard," Mark said when I pointed it out. "It is?" I asked. Emily glanced up from her phone. "It just simplifies things. Simplifies for who I wondered, but I didn't say it." I read the clause again. Authority to manage, authority to decide, authority to act. "I didn't know this was in here," I said. Mom hadn't mentioned it, but then again, Mom had trusted Mark. She trusted the idea that he would do the right thing because he always sounded like someone who would. "We don't want this to be messy," Mark said. "That's why we're moving quickly." There it was again. Speed, momentum, no room for questions. "And what if I don't want to sell?" I asked. Mark smiled, not unkindly, patiently, the way you smile at someone who doesn't yet understand how the world works. Lena, he said, you don't live here. You don't need this place. You can take your share and move on. Move on. As if grief had a timetable, as if attachment were a flaw. I looked around the room, the chair where Mom used to sit, the window she watched every morning. The house wasn't just an asset, it was a record of care, of time spent, of showing up. I need time, I said. Emily's smile tightened. We've already given this a lot of thought. I realized then that they weren't asking, they were notifying. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom. The sheets smelled like dust and detergent. I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly, listening to the house settle around me. Every sound felt familiar, grounding. By morning, I knew one thing with clarity I hadn't had the day before. This wasn't about money. It was about control, and I was already behind. What I didn't know yet was how far they were willing to go to keep me there. The first letter arrived before I'd even unpacked my overnight bag. It was waiting on the counter when I got back to my duplex, slid halfway under a stack of mail, like it didn't want to be noticed. A thick envelope, cream-colored. My brother's handwriting on the front, careful and rounded the same way it had looked when he used to label his school notebooks. I didn't open it right away. I set my keys down, kicked off my shoes, and stood there listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The quiet felt fragile, like it could crack if I moved too fast. I made tea. I sat at the small table by the window. I let the mug warm my hands before I finally slid a finger under the flap. Inside were copies, deeds, a valuation report, a short typed letter. Lena. We've spoken with an advisor. Given the current market and the condition of the property, selling now is the most responsible option. We'll need your cooperation to avoid unnecessary delays. No signature, just his name typed at the bottom. Cooperation. I laughed once quietly, more out of disbelief than humor. Cooperation implied a shared plan. This wasn't shared. It was unilateral, dressed up as practicality. I flipped through the documents. The valuation was higher than I expected. Asheville spillover, mountain views, quiet neighborhood. All the things Mom loved were now bullet points on a spreadsheet. That night I barely slept. By morning the phone calls started. Mark called first, then Emily, then Mark again. I let them go to voicemail. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wanted to hear how quickly concern turned into impatience when it wasn't rewarded with immediate compliance. By the third voicemail, Mark's tone had changed. We really need to move forward, he said. Dragging this out isn't healthy for anyone. Healthy. Another word that sounded caring until you looked at what it was attached to. I took the day off work and drove back to the house. The realtor's sign was already staked into the front yard. I pulled over and stared at it, my hands still on the steering wheel. Bright colors, a smiling woman's face, a phone number I didn't recognize. They hadn't even waited for my answer. Inside the house smelled different, like lemon cleaner layered over something sharper. Emily had been busy. The photos were gone from the hallway. Mom's throw pillows replaced with neutral ones. The stack of magazines by the chair disappeared. It felt staged, sanitized, like grief had been wiped down with a damp cloth. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, breathing slowly, counting the floorboards. 1, 2, 3. The place where Dad used to pace when he was thinking. The corner where Mom kept her sewing basket. I heard voices in the kitchen. Emily was there, standing by the counter, phone pressed to her ear. She jumped when she saw me. Oh, she said too brightly. You're early. Early. As if this were an appointment I'd agreed to. She hung up quickly. We didn't think you'd mind us getting things ready. Ready for what I asked. She gestured vaguely around the room. Showings. It's better this way. Mark came in behind her, folder under his arm. He looked startled, then recovered. We're trying to help you, he said immediately. This is a lot to handle emotionally. You don't need to be in the middle of it. I looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cruel. He was efficient. Decided. Already living in a future where this was settled. You put up a sign, I said, without telling me. He shrugged slightly. It's procedural. Procedural. Practical. Healthy. All words designed to shrink resistance. I haven't agreed to sell, I said. Emily's smile slipped. You don't need to agree to everything. Mark has authority to manage. There it was again. Authority. Management doesn't mean erasing me, I said quietly. Mark sighed like I was being unreasonable. Lena, you're taking this personally. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I just nodded once. I'm taking it seriously, I said. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. Her name was Ruth Ellison. Mid-60s, calm voice, no unnecessary reassurance. She listened without interrupting while I explained the situation, the sign in the yard. When I finished, she said, "You're not wrong to feel blindsided." That alone felt grounding. Authority clauses don't override co-ownership, she continued. They allow management, not unilateral disposal. Selling requires consent unless otherwise specified. What if they push it through anyway, I asked. They'll try, she said. Pressure is cheaper than court. I stared out the window at the trees lining my street. What do I do? You stop reacting, Ruth said. You document. You slow things down. And you decide what you want, not what you're being rushed into. That night I sent Mark a short message. I do not consent to listing or selling the property at this time. Please remove the sign until we've had a mediated discussion. He replied within minutes. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I didn't respond. The next morning, the sign was still there. Instead, I received an email from a financial advisor I'd never heard of. Copied to Mark and Emily. Subject asset optimization discussion. Optimization. Like the house was underperforming. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Ruth. Her reply came back fast. They're escalating, so should you. By the end of the week, I'd filed a formal notice of objection. Nothing dramatic, just paper, just facts. It felt strange how powerful that was, how something so quiet could interrupt momentum built on assumption. Mark called me that night. You hired a lawyer? He asked, incredulous. I consulted one, I said. You didn't think to tell me. I didn't think I needed permission. There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid, he said. You're turning this into a fight. No, I said, I'm turning it into a process. Emily texted later. I thought you trusted us. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Trust isn't access without consent. She didn't respond. A week later, the realtor's sign disappeared. Not because they'd changed their minds, because they'd realized they couldn't move forward without resistance becoming visible. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. This wasn't about the house. It was about how quickly love turned conditional when obedience stopped being automatic. And it was only the beginning. Silence can be louder than shouting when you know what it's trying to do. After the sign came down, everything went quiet. No calls, no texts, no passive-aggressive emails dressed up as concern. For a few days, I almost believed we had reached a pause, the kind where everyone steps back and breathes. But I'd lived long enough inside my family to recognize the pattern. Silence wasn't peace. Silence was strategy. I went back to work and kept my head down, ran reports, fixed a scheduling error that would have cost the company a small fortune if it had gone unnoticed. My boss thanked me in passing, already moving on to the next crisis. I liked the predictability of it, problems with clear parameters, outcomes that didn't hinge on emotional leverage. At night, though, the quiet pressed in. I started sleeping with my phone on the nightstand again, screen down, volume low. Not because I expected Mark to call, but because I expected something else, something official, something that would arrive without asking. It came on a Thursday, tucked between a utility bill and a grocery flyer. A certified letter. I signed for it with a pen that shook just slightly in my hand. Inside was a notice of intent to conduct a property assessment. Requested by the managing party. Scheduled for the following week. No request for my availability. No invitation to attend. Just information. They were moving forward without selling, inspecting, valuing, building a case. I sat on the couch, the paper resting on my knee, and felt a familiar sensation settle in my chest. Not panic, not fear, recognition. This was escalation, quiet and procedural, designed to make me feel late to my own life. I called Ruth. They're building a record, she said after reading the notice I emailed her. Condition. Market readiness. Deferred maintenance. I maintained that house, I said. I paid for repairs. I was there. I know, she said, but documentation beats memory. That afternoon I drove back to the house again. The assessor arrived early. A man in his 40s, clipboard tucked under his arm, polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He shook my hand, surprised to see me. I wasn't told you'd be here, he said. I live here, I replied. That wasn't technically true anymore, but it still felt accurate. He walked through the house slowly, jotting notes, opening cabinets, checking outlets. I followed a few steps behind, saying nothing, letting him see what he saw without commentary. The small crack in the hallway ceiling, the aging water heater, The porch rail Dad had built by hand, weathered but solid. Some updates would increase value, he said casually, pausing in the kitchen. Some updates would erase it, I said. He glanced at me, unsure how to respond, then went back to his clipboard. When he left, I locked the door behind him and stood there longer than necessary, my hand still on the knob. The house felt exposed, measured, reduced to potential. That night Mark called. You didn't need to be there, he said, irritation barely masked. I had every right to be, I replied. You're interfering with what I asked. An inspection I wasn't informed about, he sighed. You're acting like this is hostile. It is, I said calmly. You just prefer it quiet. There was a pause, then his tone shifted. Softer, familiar. The voice he used when we were kids and he wanted something from me. You know Mom would hate this, he said. The tension, the lawyers. I closed my eyes. There it was, the first real twist of the knife. You don't get to speak for her, I said. I'm just saying, he continued. She wanted us to stick together. She wanted us to be fair, I replied. Those aren't the same thing. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was tight. Emily's parents think we're being unreasonable, he said. They don't understand why you're digging in. I'm not digging in, I said. I'm standing still. You're the one pushing. After we hung up, I sat in the dark and replayed his words. Not what he said, but what he avoided. He never once asked what I wanted. He never once acknowledged that the house meant something beyond its price. A week later, the next move came. An email from a mediation service. Subject resolution options for shared property. Neutral language. Friendly tone. A list of available dates. Ruth read it and nodded. This is good, she said. They're trying to look reasonable. Are they, I asked. They're trying to look patient, she replied. There's a difference. We agreed to attend. Not because I thought it would resolve anything, but because refusal would be framed as obstruction. I was done handing them easy narratives. The mediation room was small, neutral colors, water pitchers untouched. Mark and Emily sat together on one side of the table. I sat alone. The mediator smiled a lot, used words like common ground and mutual benefit, asked Mark to speak first. We just want to move forward, he said. Lena's holding on to something that isn't sustainable. Emily nodded, eyes glossy. We're worried about her, she added. She's isolating herself. I didn't interrupt. I watched. The way concern was used like evidence. The way love was framed as a reason to override. When it was my turn, I spoke slowly. I'm not refusing to talk, I said. I'm refusing to be rushed. I'm refusing to give up my voice because it's inconvenient. The mediator leaned in. Would you consider a buyout? Mark stiffened. Emily's eyes lit up. I would consider a fair process, I replied. Not a predetermined outcome. Afterward, in the parking lot, Emily approached me. I don't recognize you, she said quietly. I looked at her. Really looked. That's because you never had to, I replied. The drive home felt long and strange, like I was leaving a version of myself behind with every mile. That night, I made a decision I hadn't wanted to make. I pulled out the old storage box from my closet. Inside were copies of bank statements, receipts, emails from Mom asking me to handle things, proof of care, proof of involvement, proof that my role hadn't been imaginary. I scanned everything, organized it, labeled files. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad. I was done being underestimated, because what they still didn't understand was this: I wasn't fighting to keep the house. I was preparing to take something else back. My standing. And once you start doing that quietly and thoroughly, people who rely on your silence begin to panic. They just don't realize it yet. The first accusation came wrapped in concern. It arrived as an email from Mark sent late at night, time-stamped just after 11. I knew better than to open it immediately, but I did anyway. Old habits don't disappear just because you've named them. Lena. I've been thinking a lot about you, about how much you've been carrying. This situation, work, being alone so much, I'm worried you're overwhelmed and not seeing things clearly. We want to make sure decisions are being made from a healthy place. I read it twice, then a third time. Worried, overwhelmed, healthy place. None of the words were aggressive. That was the point. They were the kind of words that sounded reasonable to anyone who wasn't on the receiving end. The kind that could be forwarded, quoted, documented. I didn't respond. The next morning, I forwarded it to Ruth with a single line. Is this what I think it is? Her reply came back within the hour. Yes, they're laying groundwork. Groundwork for what became clearer 2 days later when another email arrived. This one wasn't from Mark. It was from a clinical services office, a polite inquiry. They had been contacted by a family member expressing concern about my well-being and decision-making capacity. They wanted to know if I would be open to a voluntary evaluation. Voluntary. Another word that meant nothing once it was written down. I sat at my desk at work, the email open on my screen, the hum of the office fading into the background. My hands were steady. My heartbeat wasn't. I felt something colder than fear settle in. A clean, sharp understanding. They weren't just trying to sell the house anymore. They were trying to discredit me. I didn't call Mark. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't defend myself. I called Ruth. "This is serious," she said after a long pause. "Not because there's merit to it, because of how it can be used." "What do?" I asked. "You get ahead of it," she replied. "You don't argue. You document your competence before they can question it." That afternoon, I scheduled a full evaluation. Physical, cognitive, psychological, not because I doubted myself, but because I understood optics. Silence was no longer enough. I needed proof. The appointment was the week out. In the meantime, the tone shifted again. Emily started texting. "Just checking in, thinking about you. Hope you're taking care of yourself." Each message felt like a fingerprint on glass, soft, smudging, leaving something behind without ever owning it. I replied once, briefly. "I'm fine. Please stop discussing my health without me." She didn't respond. The evaluation took 3 hours. The doctor was kind but thorough. Memory tests, problem solving, attention, mood, stress levels, work history, daily functioning. I answered honestly. I didn't minimize the strain. I didn't dramatize it either. When it was over, she looked at me steadily and said, "You're under stress, but you're functioning well. There's no indication of impairment." I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized was locked. I asked for documentation. She nodded, already reaching for the forms. That evening, I sent copies to Ruth. Then I did something else. Something I hadn't planned on doing yet. I emailed Mark. "I am aware you contacted a clinical services office regarding my capacity. Any further attempts to question my mental fitness without cause will be documented and addressed through counsel." No emotion, no explanation. His reply came fast. "I don't know what you're talking about." I didn't respond. A week later, the next letter arrived. This one was from a law firm. Not Ruth's, not anyone I recognized. The letterhead was clean, professional, Denver address. Subject: request for clarification regarding shared asset management. I read it slowly. The language was careful, neutral, almost friendly. It referenced my refusal to consent to the sale, my resistance to inspections, my emotional attachment. It suggested a conversation about alternative arrangements, including partition. Partition. The word sat heavy on the page. Forced division. Ruth called me as soon as she saw it. "They're escalating," she said. "And they're doing it the way people do when they think time is on their side." "What's the risk?" I asked. "They'll argue asset deterioration," she said. "That the property is losing value because of inaction. They'll say you're preventing reasonable use." I looked around my duplex. The quiet, the order, my calendar neatly managed, my bills paid on time. "And the capacity angle?" I asked. She exhaled. "They've already hinted at it. That's why your evaluation matters." That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was panicking, but because something inside me had shifted. The part of me that had still hoped this could resolve quietly had gone still. In its place was something colder, clearer. I wasn't dealing with grief anymore. I was dealing with strategy. Over the next month, the pressure increased in small, relentless ways. Requests for access, suggestions for contractors, invitations to just talk things through. Each one framed as reasonable, each one documented when I declined. I stopped taking calls altogether. Everything went through email, through Ruth, through paper. And slowly something changed. The emails grew sharper, less patient. "You're being difficult. This doesn't have to be adversarial. We're running out of options." Options. One afternoon, Ruth forwarded me a draft motion they were preparing. Not filed yet, just a warning shot. They were seeking court intervention to compel sale or appoint an external manager. Citing conflict, emotional decision-making, lack of cooperation. I read it without flinching. Then I did the one thing they weren't expecting. I asked Ruth to draft my own motion, not in response. Initiating. Petition to formally define management boundaries, to restrict unilateral actions, to require mutual consent for any sale renovation or third-party involvement. It wasn't dramatic, it was precise. When Mark received notice, he called me for the first time in weeks. "You're really doing this," he said, disbelief bleeding through. Yes, I replied. You're tearing this family apart, he said. No, I said. I'm stopping you from deciding everything without me. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something that finally clarified everything. You always had to make things complicated. I closed my eyes. No, I said quietly, I just stopped making them easy for you. When I hung up, my hands were steady. The house, the money, the history, all of it was still there, tangled and unresolved. But for the first time, the narrative had shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was setting terms. And people who are used to control don't fear anger. They fear boundaries backed by action. That was when I knew the next move wouldn't be subtle. It would be decisive. The hearing was scheduled for mid-July, right in the middle of a heat wave that pressed down on everything and everyone. Even the courthouse felt tired, its stone steps warm underfoot, its air stale with recycled breath and old arguments. I arrived early. Not out of nerves, but habit. I like to know where I'm sitting before anyone else enters the room. Mark and Emily arrived together 10 minutes later. They looked composed, coordinated. Emily wore a soft blue dress, the kind people choose when they want to appear reasonable. Mark carried a leather portfolio he'd probably bought for this exact purpose. They nodded at me like we were acquaintances who'd once shared a long history and now pretended it didn't matter. Their attorney followed. A man in his 40s with a relaxed posture and a smile that didn't quite settle. He shook Ruth's hand politely, barely acknowledged me. The judge came in, everyone stood, everyone sat. The proceedings were brief. This wasn't the main event. This was positioning, framing, establishing tone. Their attorney spoke first, calm, respectful. He talked about concern, about conflict, about my emotional resistance to reasonable solutions. About how prolonged indecision could harm the asset. Asset. He said it the way you say weather. Neutral. Unavoidable. When it was Ruth's turn, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She simply laid out facts, dates, emails, the sign in the yard, the inspection without notice, the attempt to question my capacity, the documentation of my involvement, my financial contributions, my evaluation. The judge listened, asked a few clarifying questions, took notes. At the end, he denied their request for immediate action, ordered a pause, required mediation before any further filings. Not a win, not a loss. A delay. In the hallway afterward, Mark cornered me by the water fountain. This is insane, he hissed. You're dragging strangers into this. You brought the first stranger, I said calmly. I just stopped pretending. Emily stood a few steps back, arms crossed tightly, eyes flicking between us like she was watching something she'd lost control of. You could still end this, she said. Just take a buyout. I looked at her, at the tension in her jaw, at the way her hand clenched around her purse strap. I'm not here to cash out my grief, I said. Mark scoffed. You always make everything symbolic. No, I replied. You just reduce things until they fit your plans. That night, something unexpected happened. I got an email from the realtor. Not the one Mark had hired. Another one. A local agent who specialized in estates. She wrote carefully, respectfully. Said she'd been approached informally about the property, but wanted to confirm authority before engaging. I forwarded it to Ruth. Her reply came with a single sentence. They're shopping around you. That was the moment I understood the scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about pressure anymore. This was about replacement. Finding a way to move forward as if I were an obstacle to be navigated around, not a person to be reckoned with. I didn't confront Mark, I didn't warn him. I did something else. I requested a full accounting. Not just of the house, of every expense, every consultation, every payment made from shared funds since Mom's death. Travel, legal, advisory. Ruth filed the request quietly, formally. The response came 2 weeks later. Incomplete. Receipts missing, explanations vague, categories blurred. Emily called me that night, voice tight. Why are you doing this? She asked. This feels vindictive. It's transparency, I said. You don't trust us, she snapped. I trusted you when you needed access, I replied. That didn't end well. She went quiet. The next discovery was accidental. I was organizing old documents from the storage box when I found a bank statement I hadn't noticed before. Not the house account. Another one. Opened shortly after Mom died. Joint. Mark's name. Emily's. Small amounts at first, then larger. Transfers labeled consultation. Improvement planning. I stared at the page for a long time. They'd been spending in anticipation, not on maintenance, on preparation. I sent it to Ruth. Her response was immediate. This changes things. Within days, the tone shifted again. Mark emailed conciliatory. We should reset. Let's start fresh. This isn't worth destroying our relationship. I didn't respond. Emily texted, I miss how things used to be. I stared at the message, then deleted it. They weren't scared yet. Not really. They were unsettled. Off balance. The difference mattered. The mediation session came and went without resolution. Too many non-answers. Too much avoidance. The mediator suggested a cooling off period. Ruth laughed quietly when she told me. They don't want time, she said. They want compliance. The final straw came a month later. I received a notice from the county, an inquiry regarding zoning, a request for clarification on proposed changes to property use. I hadn't proposed anything. I called the office, asked who initiated the inquiry. A man gave me the name, Mark. I sat in my car afterward, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The heat pressed in through the windshield. I didn't feel angry. I felt certain. This wasn't about miscommunication. This was about erasure. That evening, I called Ruth and told her I was ready. For what she asked. For the move they won't expect, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then we do it clean, she replied, and we do it now. I hung up and opened my laptop. Pulled up the draft we'd been discussing quietly for weeks. The one I hadn't wanted to believe I'd need. A petition to formally sever shared control. Not by selling, by forcing a choice. Buy me out. Or I buy you out. Independent appraisal, court oversight, no maneuvering, no pressure. I read it once, then I signed my name. The sound of the digital confirmation felt louder than any argument we'd had so far. I wasn't escalating emotionally. I was ending the game. And for the first time since Mom died, I slept through the night without my phone beside me. Because when you stop trying to be understood and start insisting on fairness, things move fast. And not everyone keeps their footing when the ground finally shifts under them. The response didn't come immediately. That was how I knew it had landed. For almost 2 weeks after the petition was filed, there was nothing. No emails, no texts, no late-night voicemails pretending to be concerned. The silence this time felt different. It wasn't strategic quiet. It was recalculation. People who rely on pressure don't know what to do when the pressure no longer works. Ruth called me on a Tuesday morning while I was at my desk halfway through reconciling a logistics report. They're scrambling, she said without preamble. Their attorney requested an extension. For what reason, I asked. She cited the need to evaluate financial feasibility. I leaned back in my chair. Financial feasibility. Translation, they hadn't expected to be forced into a real decision. Which option are they leaning toward, I asked. Ruth paused. Buying you out. That surprised me. Not because they wanted the house, but because of what it implied. Buying me out meant real money, immediate money. No vague future profits, no investors, no hypothetical renovations. Mark had always preferred leverage to liquidity. Do they have it, I asked. That's the question, she said. The answer started revealing itself over the next few days. Emily emailed first, long, emotional, carefully written to sound spontaneous. I never wanted it to be like this. Mark is under so much stress. This legal route feels extreme. I read it once and archived it. Then Mark emailed, shorter, less polished. We need to talk numbers. That was new. I forwarded it to Ruth without replying. She called me back an hour later. They want an appraisal fast. Court appointed, I asked. Yes, she said, which tells me they're worried about cash. The appraisal was scheduled within the week. I drove back to the house again the same way I had so many times since Mom died. But this time felt different. Less like returning to something fragile, more like witnessing a process finally reaching its conclusion. The appraiser was meticulous. Older man, no small talk. He measured, photographed, asked neutral questions about updates and maintenance. I answered plainly, sticking to facts. When he left, I sat on the porch alone. The wind moved through the trees the way it always had. The house didn't feel threatened anymore. It felt patient. Like it had seen this before in different forms with different people. A week later, the report came back. Higher than Mark's original valuation. Much higher. Ruth didn't hide her satisfaction. They underestimated the market, and your documentation helped. That afternoon, Mark called me directly. No buffer, no Emily. I didn't realize it would come back like that, he said. His voice sounded tired, not angry, not righteous, just worn down. That's why I asked for a neutral process, I replied. Silence. Then we can't afford to buy you out at that number. There it was. I closed my eyes, not in triumph, but in confirmation. Then I buy you out, I said. He laughed once, sharp and incredulous. With what money? With financing, I replied. And assets you didn't plan for. Another pause, longer this time. You don't have that kind of capital, he said. I don't need to, I replied. I just need approval. What approval? From the court, I said. Which I'll get because I've been transparent from the beginning. The line went quiet. Then he said something that told me everything I needed to know. You planned this. No, I said calmly. I prepared for what you made necessary. Emily called that night. Her voice was brittle. You're really going to take this from us? I didn't correct her language. I let it sit. I'm not taking anything I said. I'm choosing certainty. You're punishing us, she said. No, I replied. I stopped absorbing consequences that weren't mine. She cried then, softly, not performative, real. For a moment, I felt something tug in my chest. The old instinct. The one that wanted to smooth things over to make it easier for everyone else. I let the moment pass. I hope you land somewhere stable, I said. I mean that. She didn't respond. The court hearing to finalize the buyout was brief. No drama, no raised voices, just numbers, terms, deadlines. The judge looked at us both and said, "This is why clarity matters early." Mark didn't meet my eyes. 30 days later, the house was legally mine. I stood in the empty living room after the paperwork was finalized, the keys warm in my hand. Same keys, different weight. Not because they were heavier, because they were finally undisputed. Mark and Emily moved on quickly after that. New city, new plans, a story they could tell themselves that didn't require acknowledging how far they'd gone. We didn't speak again for a long time. I didn't celebrate. I cleaned. I opened windows. Let fresh air move through rooms that had been talked about like inventory. I put Mom's photos back where they belonged, not as leverage, as memory. One evening I sat on the porch as the sun went down, the sky turning soft and wide. I thought about how close I'd come to losing not just the house, but my footing, my voice, my sense of legitimacy. I'd been taught my whole life that keeping the peace was the same as being kind. I know better now. Peace without consent is just control that hasn't been named yet. And the most powerful thing I did in this entire process wasn't arguing. It was choosing to act while everyone else was still trying to manage the story. Because revenge doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like ownership, and sometimes that's enough. The quiet that followed ownership wasn't empty. It was deliberate. For the first few weeks after the buyout finalized, I moved through the house slowly, like someone learning a language they already knew but had never been allowed to speak out loud. Every room carried memory, but the tension was gone. No looming emails, no pending court dates, no sense of being watched for compliance. I didn't rush to change anything. I cleaned the way you do when you're reclaiming space, not staging it. I wiped down baseboards, oiled the porch rail, fixed the loose hinge on the hallway closet that Dad had meant to get to and never did. Small acts, honest ones. Friends asked if I felt relieved. I didn't have a word for it yet. Work shifted too. My focus sharpened in a way I hadn't expected. Without the constant background hum of family conflict, my mind felt clearer. I caught things faster, spoke up in meetings I would have stayed quiet in before. My boss noticed. "You seem steadier," she said one afternoon. "Like you're not carrying something extra anymore." I smiled politely and didn't explain. Some things don't need context. The first sign that the story wasn't over came in the form of a forwarded article. A mutual acquaintance sent it to me with a brief note. "Thought you should see this." The headline referenced a failed property venture in Colorado, a small development that had fallen through due to financing irregularities. The names weren't front and center, but they were there if you read closely. Mark's name was listed as a consultant, Emily's as a co-signer on a loan. I read it once, then again. The timing lined up. The debt. The urgency. The sudden push to sell the house. It all fit together now in a way that felt less personal and more procedural. They hadn't just wanted to sell. They'd needed to. I closed the article and didn't share it with anyone. A week later, Mark emailed me. The subject line was neutral, checking in. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Hope you're doing well. We've had a lot going on. Just wanted to say I'm glad things worked out." There was no apology. No acknowledgement of how close he'd come to crossing lines that don't uncross easily. I replied with one sentence. "I'm well, I hope you are too." That was it. Emily didn't reach out at all. I learned through others that they'd downsized quickly, sold the SUV, moved into a rental. The story being told was that they'd chosen simplicity, a fresh start. I didn't correct anyone. Let people keep the narratives they need. Late one night, as I was going through a box of old photos, I found something I'd forgotten existed. A handwritten note from Mom, folded small, tucked into the back of an album. If you're reading this, I probably forgot to say something out loud. You were always the one who stayed. That matters more than you know. I sat on the floor and held the paper in both hands until the words stopped blurring. That was the moment the last of the bitterness drained away. Not because I'd been vindicated, but because I'd been seen, even if it was late. I started making plans for the house then. Not renovations, intentions. I set up a trust. Clear terms, clear boundaries, no ambiguity. I named a successor that wasn't based on birth order or expectation but on willingness and respect. I met with Ruth one last time to finalize it. This will prevent future disputes, she said. That's the point, I replied. A few months later, Mark tried again. This time he showed up. No warning, just his car in the driveway one Saturday afternoon. I was in the yard trimming back overgrowth near the fence line when I heard the engine. I didn't rush inside. I didn't brace myself. I finished what I was doing, wiped my hands on my jeans, and turned to face him. He looked older, thinner. His confidence had softened into something less certain. I just wanted to see the place, he said. I nodded. You're trespassing. He blinked, surprised. I didn't mean... I know what you meant, I said calmly. That doesn't change the boundary. He shifted his weight. I thought maybe we could talk. We are talking, I replied, right now. He glanced past me at the house. It looks good? It's stable, I said. That's different. There was a long pause. He cleared his throat. I didn't think it would end like this, he said. I met his gaze. Neither did I. That doesn't make it wrong. He nodded slowly. You always were more thorough. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't praise. It was recognition arriving too late to change anything. I need you to leave, I said. He didn't argue. As he drove away, I felt something settle fully into place. I wasn't guarding anything anymore. I was simply living inside what I'd chosen. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of water and watched the light fade from the trees. I thought about how easily I'd been cast as difficult the moment I stopped being convenient. How quickly love turned conditional when access was limited. The story people tell about revenge is loud, dramatic, satisfying in obvious ways. This wasn't that. This was quieter. This was me waking up every day in a life that no longer required me to justify my existence to people who benefited from my silence. And that I realized was the real reversal. They lost leverage. I gained peace. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that stays. Peace has a way of testing you after you think you've earned it. It doesn't arrive as calm. It arrives as space. And space gives old habits room to resurface if you're not paying attention. The first real test came in early November, right before Thanksgiving. I hadn't planned to host anyone. I hadn't planned anything at all, actually. That was the point. For the first time in years, the holiday didn't feel like an obligation to manage other people's emotions. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Lena, it's Aunt Carol. Call me when you get a chance. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Aunt Carol was my mother's younger sister. Gentle, well-meaning. Also deeply invested in the idea that family harmony mattered more than individual comfort. I called her back the next day. Her voice was warm, practiced. Honey, I've been meaning to reach out. I heard things have been tense. That's one word for it, I said. She laughed softly. Families go through phases. Phases, like weather, temporary, unavoidable. She talked for a while before getting to the point. How hard this year must be. How Mark had been under pressure. How Emily was struggling. How everyone missed how things used to be. Then she said it. Thanksgiving might be a good reset. I waited. You know, she continued, having everyone together, healing energy. I closed my eyes. I'm not hosting, I said calmly. Oh, no, she said quickly. Not hosting, just attending. Mark mentioned he might come up. There it was again, mentioned, like a casual aside, like I hadn't spent months defending my right to exist without being overridden. I won't be there, I said. She paused, just long enough for disappointment to register. I hate seeing the family split like this, she said gently. I'm not splitting anything, I replied. I'm declining an invitation. That feels the same to some people, she said. I'm not responsible for how other people interpret my boundaries, I replied. Silence. Then she sighed. You've changed. Yes, I said, I had to. We hung up politely, cordially, nothing resolved. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table and realized something uncomfortable. Even now, even after everything, people were still trying to use softness to move me, to make me doubt myself, to reframe distance as cruelty. I wrote one sentence on a sticky note and put it on the fridge. Declining access is not an act of aggression. I left it there. The second test came from somewhere I didn't expect. Work. My boss called me into her office one morning with a careful expression. HR reached out, she said. Nothing serious, just a question. I felt my spine straighten. What kind of question? She asked whether everything's okay with you personally, she said. Stress-wise. There it was again. Concern, soft-edged, framed as care. I nodded once. What did you say? That you're one of our most consistent performers, she said. That you've been focused and reliable. I didn't ask where the question came from. I already knew. That afternoon, Ruth confirmed it. They made an inquiry, she said. Indirect, no formal complaint, just fishing. Through who, I asked. An associate of their attorney, she replied. It didn't go anywhere. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Even after losing control of the house, they were still testing whether they could reach around me. Do I need to do anything, I asked. No, Ruth said. You already did. That night I slept deeply. The kind of sleep that comes when you stop scanning for danger. Thanksgiving came and went quietly. I made soup. I walked the trails behind the house. I watched the sun dip early and didn't rush to fill the silence. On Friday morning, I received a message from Mark. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're well. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because not every message deserves a reply. December brought snow and stillness. I decorated lightly. A wreath on the door. A single strand of lights along the porch rail. Enough to mark time without performing it. A package arrived a week before Christmas. No return address. Inside was a framed photo. Mom and Dad on the porch, arms around each other, laughing at something just out of frame. No note. I sat with it for a long time before placing it on the mantel. That was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get. And strangely, it was enough. Not forgiveness, closure. Because I understood now that reconciliation doesn't always come with accountability. Sometimes it comes with distance that stops hurting. On Christmas morning, I woke early and made coffee. The house was quiet, whole, mine. I didn't think about revenge. I thought about choice. About how many years I'd mistaken endurance for virtue. How often I'd said yes when my body had already said no. I'd been taught that strong women hold families together. No one teaches you that sometimes strength is knowing when to stop holding. As the year turned, I felt something settle into permanence. Not happiness, stability, the kind that doesn't require anyone else's approval. And that was when I realized the story wasn't about a house at all. It never had been. It was about who gets to decide when your life is open for negotiation. And for the first time, the answer was clear. Not them, me. Stability changes your sense of time. When you're no longer waiting for the next blow days, stop blurring together. You begin to notice small things again. The way the light hits the kitchen floor in the afternoon. The sound of the porch boards settling at night. The quiet satisfaction of finishing something without interruption. By late January, the house had settled into me as much as I had settled into it. That was when the email arrived. Not from Mark, not from Emily, from a name I didn't recognize. Subject, quick question about the property. I didn't open it right away. I've learned that urgency is often manufactured. I finished what I was doing first, then sat down and clicked. The sender introduced himself as a consultant working on behalf of a private investment group. He said they were exploring opportunities in the area and had heard the property might be available now or in the future. He asked if I would be open to a conversation. He ended with a line that made my mouth go dry. I understand there may have been prior internal disagreement. We specialize in smoothing transitions. I forwarded it to Ruth. Her reply was immediate. Who referred them? I didn't know yet, but I had a guess. I didn't respond to the consultant. Instead, I asked Ruth to do what she does best. Quiet inquiries, background checks, paper trails. It took 3 days. The investment group was real, small, aggressive, known for acquiring family-held properties under the guise of mediation. Their consultant had a history of being introduced through personal connections rather than open listings. And the referral, Emily's maiden name, appeared in the chain. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the screen, not angry, not surprised, just tired. This wasn't desperation anymore, this was persistence. I called Ruth. They're still trying to bypass you, she said. They're hoping you'll talk to a third party and soften. I won't, I replied. I know, she said, but this gives us something. What kind of something? Evidence, she said, of interference after resolution. That night I slept poorly. Not because I was afraid, but because something old was stirring. A familiar ache. The one that comes from realizing someone is willing to keep pushing long after the answer has been given. The next morning I did something I hadn't done yet. I wrote directly to Emily. Not emotionally, not defensively, precisely. I'm aware of the outreach from a third-party investment group connected to your family. Any further attempts to engage intermediaries regarding my property will be documented as harassment. I didn't accuse, I didn't explain, she replied an hour later. I don't know what you're talking about. I stared at the message, then closed my laptop. Denial was part of the pattern. It always had been. The follow-up came not from Emily but from Mark. He showed up again. This time, he didn't pull into the driveway. He parked on the road, a small concession, a sign he knew where the line was now. I met him at the edge of the yard. I didn't authorize anything he said immediately. I didn't say you did, I replied. He looked tired, older than he should have. The version of him that had always assumed he'd land on his feet was finally questioning that assumption. Emily's parents are involved, he said. They think this whole thing could have been handled differently. I nodded, they always do. She didn't mean for it to come to this, he said. It came to this because no one stopped when they were told no, I replied. He rubbed his face with his hand. We're just trying to move forward. So am I said, without being managed. There was a long pause. Then he said something that surprised me. I don't know how to talk to you anymore. I studied him. The man who had always spoken with confidence when he was in control, now uncertain because the ground had shifted. You talk to me like an equal, I said, or you don't talk to me at all. He nodded slowly like he was committing the sentence to memory. I'll tell them to stop, he said. Do, I replied. He left without argument. For the next month, nothing happened. No emails, no consultants, no surprise visits. Ruth confirmed that the investment group had dropped the inquiry. They don't like resistance, she said. They like exhaustion. Spring came early that year. The first warm weekend I spent the day outside clearing brush, planting herbs along the porch, my hands in the dirt, my mind quiet. That evening I found an envelope in the mailbox. Handwritten, from Emily. Inside was a check. No amount that matched anything, just a round number, accompanied by a short note. For the trouble, I hope this helps you move on. I stared at it for a long time. Then I tore the check in half, not because I wanted to make a statement, because I understood what it was. An attempt to rewrite the ending, to buy absolution without accountability. I mailed the pieces back without a note. That was the last contact. Weeks later, I received confirmation from Ruth that any remaining legal windows had closed. No outstanding claims, no further leverage. The house was quiet again, truly quiet. I stood in the doorway one evening watching the sky darken and felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief. Completion. I hadn't won. I'd finished. And finishing, I realized, was its own kind of power. Because the most effective revenge isn't exposure. It's removal. Removing yourself from cycles designed to keep you small. Removing access from people who confuse love with control. Removing the need to explain your worth. I locked the door that night and didn't look back. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. They end with clarity, and that was enough. The aftermath didn't arrive with consequences for them. It arrived with consequences for me. Not legal ones, not financial ones, internal ones. The kind that surface only after the noise is gone and you're left alone with the version of yourself that survived something quietly. By early spring, people around me started treating the situation as resolved. The polite questions stopped. The careful glances faded. The story settled into whatever shape it needed to take for those not living inside it. I was the one who felt the shift most sharply. Because when control is removed from your life, the space it leaves behind can feel disorienting. You don't realize how much of your identity has been shaped by resistance until resistance is no longer required. I woke up one morning and realized I didn't have anything to brace for. No emails to anticipate, no subtext to decode, no decisions to defend. Just a quiet house and a full day ahead of me. It should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt unfamiliar. I went through the motions at first. Work, chores, evening walks. But there was a hollow edge to it, not painful, just empty. Like finishing a long project and not knowing what to do with your hands afterward. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the study staring at the bookshelf where Dad's old binders still sat. Manuals, notes, papers he'd kept long after they were useful just in case. I pulled one down at random and opened it. Inside was a folded envelope, yellowed, addressed to me. Not sealed, not hidden, just overlooked. I sat down slowly and opened it. Inside was a letter, written years ago, after Dad died, before Mom got sick. Lena. If you ever find this, it means I didn't say something when I should have. I know you hold things together. I know you don't complain. I also know people mistake that for you being fine. You're allowed to choose yourself even if it disappoints others. especially then. I read it twice, then a third time. The hollow feeling shifted. It wasn't grief, it wasn't relief. It was recognition. I hadn't just been fighting for the house. I'd been fighting against a lifetime of being the one expected to absorb discomfort so others could move freely. That realization came with another one, quieter but heavier. I didn't know who I was without that role, so I started paying attention to what I wanted when no one was watching, to how my body reacted when I said yes versus when I said no, to the difference between obligation and intention. I stopped volunteering explanations. I stopped softening my answers. I stopped filling silence that didn't belong to me. At work, this showed up as boundaries, clear ones. I declined a project that would have required constant overtime without compensation. My boss blinked, then nodded. Fair, she said. Fair. Another word I'd been trained not to ask for. With friends, it meant letting invitations pass without guilt, choosing rest without justification, not showing up just to prove loyalty. Some people adjusted. Some drifted. I let them. Then unexpectedly something else arrived. An opportunity. Not dramatic, not flashy, a senior role opening in another division. More responsibility, more visibility. A move I would have avoided before because it required asserting authority. My manager brought it up cautiously. You don't have to decide right away, she said. I just thought of you. I went home and sat with it. No rush, no pressure, just a question. Do I want this? Not do they expect this? Not would this make sense to someone else? The answer surprised me. Yes. Not because I needed to prove anything, because I wanted to build something that wasn't reactive, something forward-facing. I accepted. Mark found out through someone else. He emailed once, brief. Congrats on the new role. I replied the same way. Thank you. No reopening, no reconciliation attempt. Just acknowledgement. Emily didn't reach out at all. I heard later that they were separating. Quietly. No drama. Just two people realizing the version of the future they'd been pushing toward wasn't holding. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. The kind that lets you breathe without checking who's watching. One evening, months later, I hosted a small dinner. Nothing formal. A few friends. Simple food. Laughter that didn't require performance. At one point, someone asked how I ended up with the house. I paused, then answered honestly. I stopped negotiating my own existence. They nodded, not fully understanding, but respecting the tone. After everyone left, I cleaned up slowly. No rush, no exhaustion. I stood in the kitchen afterward, the house quiet again, and felt something settle. Not triumph, alignment. I hadn't exposed anyone. I hadn't shouted my truth. I hadn't demanded validation. I'd acted. I'd chosen clarity over comfort, boundaries over approval, structure over chaos. That was the real turning point. Not when I signed papers, but when I stopped asking myself whether I was allowed to. Because when you grow up being valued for what you absorb, choosing yourself feels like betrayal. Until you realize it's survival. And survival, when done with integrity, doesn't require revenge. It requires resolve. The story wasn't over yet, but it had changed direction. And this time I was walking forward without looking back. I didn't hear from Mark for almost a year after that. Not directly, anyway. His name came up occasionally through other people. Always filtered, always softened. Someone would mention he'd changed jobs, that he seemed quieter now, that life had humbled him in ways no one said out loud. I listened without asking questions. Distance does something important. It turns information into data instead of obligation. The real shift came the morning I received a certified envelope from an unfamiliar law office. Not Denver this time. Local, plain letterhead, no aggressive language. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Inside was a notice of intent to amend a trust. Mark's trust. He was naming a guardian, setting contingencies, clarifying beneficiaries. The letter explained that as part of the process, he was required to notify immediate family. Me. I read it twice, then set it down. This wasn't a legal threat. It wasn't pressure. It was something else. Acknowledgement. He hadn't reached out emotionally. He hadn't apologized. But he was doing what people do when they finally understand that clarity matters. When they realize assumptions can cost you everything. Later that day he emailed. Short, direct. I'm cleaning things up. I thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. That's wise. He responded an hour later. I should have done it sooner. That was it. No explanations, no justifications, no reopening of old wounds. I didn't push for more. Sometimes growth doesn't look like remorse. Sometimes it looks like prevention. A week later, Emily reached out for the first time in over a year. Her message was careful. I hope you're well. I wanted to say I understand now that what we did wasn't concern. It was fear. I'm sorry for my part in it. I read it slowly, not because I doubted the sincerity, but because I was measuring my response against who I'd become. I replied with one sentence. I appreciate the acknowledgement. She didn't write back. That was enough. Spring came again, softer this time. The kind of spring that doesn't feel like a test. I planted tomatoes along the side of the house, fixed the last loose board on the porch, replaced the mailbox that had leaned too long without complaint. Small closures. At work, my new role settled into rhythm. I hired thoughtfully, delegated clearly. I noticed how often people relaxed when expectations were transparent, how little drama existed when power wasn't hoarded. One afternoon, a junior analyst knocked on my door. I wanted to ask something, she said, hesitating. How do you handle it when people try to push past your limits without making it obvious? I didn't answer right away. Then I said I stop explaining. She blinked. Just like that. Explanations invite negotiation, I said. Decisions don't. She nodded slowly, filing it away. That night I walked through the house and realized something quietly profound. I no longer felt the need to prove that I deserved it. Not to the court, not to my family, not to myself. The house wasn't a symbol anymore. It was just where I lived, where my life happened, where mornings were quiet and evenings were mine. I found the old photo again, Mom and Dad laughing on the porch, and placed it back on the mantel after cleaning. I didn't speak to them out loud, I didn't need to. The apology I'd once hoped for never came in the form I'd imagined. There was no dramatic admission, no tearful confession, no acknowledgement of how close I'd come to being erased from my own life. But there was something else. There was restraint. There was distance that respected boundaries instead of testing them. There was silence that no longer carried threat. And I realized that was the most honest outcome I could have asked for. Some families reconcile through closeness. Others reconcile through separation that stops the harm. I'd been taught that keeping relationships alive at any cost was the measure of love. I know better now. Love without respect is just entitlement with good branding. I didn't rebuild what was broken. I built something new where the damage couldn't reach. As summer approached, I sat on the porch one evening watching the light fade the way it always had. The house creaked softly behind me, the world felt steady. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing. I wasn't negotiating. I was just living. And that was the clearest sign of all that the story was nearly complete. Not because everyone had changed, but because I had. One chapter remained. Not about them, about what I would carry forward, and what I would never carry again. The last thing I changed was the lock. Not because I was afraid someone would come back, but because I wanted the final decision to be mine. I stood at the back door with the new key in my hand, the old one resting on the counter beside me. The metal looked the same. It always does. What changes is who gets to turn it. I replaced the lock slowly, methodically, the way you do when you want to remember the moment. When it was done, I tested it once, then twice. The door closed with a solid, ordinary sound. Nothing dramatic, nothing symbolic on the surface. But it mattered. People think revenge is loud, that it comes with confrontation, exposure, or a final speech that lands like a verdict. That is what makes it easy to dismiss. That is what keeps people waiting for permission to act. What I learned is this. The most effective revenge does not argue. It does not explain. It does not seek agreement. It removes access. After that day, nothing else happened. No surprise messages, no new intermediaries, no family members calling to suggest a conversation over coffee. The story did not restart itself because there was nothing left to pull on. I settled into a life that did not require vigilance. Mornings came quietly. Coffee on the porch. The same view, but a different feeling in my body. I noticed how much energy I used to spend anticipating other people's reactions, rehearsing explanations, softening decisions before I had even made them. That energy was mine again. At work, I continued to lead without apology. Clear expectations, clear boundaries. I watched how often people confuse kindness with availability and how relieved they are when the two are separated. At home, I kept things simple. I repaired what needed repairing. I left the rest alone. Not everything old needs to be replaced. Some things just need to be respected. Mark and I never returned to what we were. We did not become close again. We did not revisit the past. What we became instead was distant and civil, which was more honest than the version of closeness built on my silence. Emily remained a footnote, not an enemy, not a villain, just someone who had shown me exactly how far fear will take a person when it is rewarded. I did not wish her harm. I also did not make space for her comfort. That was the balance I had spent my life missing. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by while I was working in the yard. She had lived on the road for decades, watched families come and go. "Looks like you finally made the place yours," she said. I smiled. It always was. She nodded like she understood something I had not said. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the window open, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling. I thought about the version of myself who stood in a courthouse hallway being told she was emotional, who read emails questioning her capacity, who was framed as difficult for asking not to be erased. I did not feel anger toward her. I felt respect. She did not raise her voice. She did not plead. She did not perform pain for sympathy. She paid attention. She documented. She acted. That is what changed everything. If there is one thing I would say to anyone listening to this now, folding laundry or driving home or sitting with a cup of coffee that has gone cold without you noticing it, is this. When people tell you that you are being selfish for protecting what is yours, they are usually reacting to the loss of control, not the loss of connection. Love that requires access without consent is not love, it is entitlement. Family that survives only when one person stays quiet is not family. It is a hierarchy pretending to be tradition. You do not owe anyone your silence to keep the peace. Peace that depends on your erasure is not peace at all. I did not win by taking something from them. I won by refusing to give myself away. The house still stands. The porch still creaks. The light still moves across the floor in the late afternoon, the same way it always has. What changed was not the place, it was the boundary. And that boundary did more for me than any apology ever could. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever been made to feel unreasonable for wanting dignity, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you are listening from and what choosing yourself looked like in your life. And if you want more stories like this, stories about quiet revenge, hard boundaries, and the moment the tables finally turn, take a second to like this and subscribe. Sometimes the strongest ending is not reconciliation, it is clarity. And sometimes choosing yourself is the only justice you will ever need.